when a Milwaukee baseball icon
I feel responsible for baseball in this city.
skipped town for an arch rival,
Thank you. Feels good.
and an ace on the mound was traded away,
Yeah, I was definitely shocked.
the season may have looked a little bleak.
No one in spring training would have said the Brewers will win the NL Central.
But an old face
There's just something about this city.
became the new leader,
Fly ball center field.
and the 2024 Milwaukee Brewers
Terang into right. And flies. Goodbye. A three-run blast. William Thomas.
are once again October bound. From the Fox 6 studios, this is Open Record. I'm Bryan Polcyn, and I'm joined by a pair of special co-hosts today. First, we have Fox 6 News anchor Ted Perry. Ted, thanks for coming back on Open Record.
I'm happy to be here.
And we have Fox 6 Sports Director Tim Van Vooren. Welcome back to the podcast, Tim.
Also happy to be here.
We are recording this episode on Tuesday, September 24th for release on September 26th. As we record, it's been 6 days since the Milwaukee Brewers clinched the National League Central Division title, completing an almost perfect wire-to-wire run as the first-place team in the division. But there is still uncertainty about what the playoff picture looks like ahead. We'll talk about how they got here and what to expect when the postseason begins October 1st, right after the break. So the Milwaukee Brewers are headed to the playoffs for the sixth time in the past 7 years. That is really an unprecedented run of success for this franchise. But for many Brewers fans, this one is extra sweet because it comes in the very first season after longtime Brewers player, manager, and Whitefish Bay native Craig Counsell left to manage the Crew's arch rival, the Chicago Cubs. Does that make this a little bit different, this playoff run, different than others, specifically that piece?
I think it does. I think that the expectation coming into this season was drastically different than it's been in recent seasons in Milwaukee. The personnel changes, obviously right at the top with the manager who was so identified with Milwaukee baseball, just set this season off on a different tilt to begin with. And so the expectation may be similar from fans in terms of what the actual production will be. Well, can they get past the first round, for instance? But the way the dynamics line up for that changes the entire outlook.
Oh, Ted, I know that we talked about Craig Counsell here on this podcast, and you're a Whitefish Bay guy, and while there's some people who felt it was this great betrayal because he went to the Cubs, in other ways you go, the guy's doing the best thing for himself, but does that still affect the fan base? As a fan, does it still affect how you feel about the season?
Of course it does. As a fan, I mean, first of all, I don't know Craig Counsell well. I've met him once or twice, a handful of occasions. Do you really fault a guy for taking a paycheck? Come on, who among us wouldn't take that job? The question then, as it is now, is at what price to your hometown and how you're looked at your hometown. And some people thought clinching, especially with that a Cubs loss technically gave them the division, was so the chef's kiss of it all, right? You know, that ha.
Usually it's not great to clinch on somebody else's loss.
But
that
in this case, it seemed to be okay, right? So yeah, I mean, is your question? I forget what your question technically is.
Well, my question was, do you think that impacted how this playoff run feels?
Absolutely, and because of that as well. And the Cubs they were a pretty good second half team, passed the Cardinals and started to get close there and then never really closed that gap.
You know, Tim, you mentioned that there weren't a lot of expectations. I mean, after Craig Counsell leaves for the Cubs, Corbin Burns is traded. We know Brandon Woodruff was having surgery, so we knew he was going to miss all of 2024. And I think for a lot of fans, you look at that and go, is this kind of a rebuild or is this just not going to be a great year? And expectations weren't really very high, were they?
And Devin Williams, your closer, was going to miss the first half of the season. And who was the closer going to be? Remember? Abner Uribe. Where did he go? It's been that type of season all along. So what you thought was going to come in and replace the old hasn't necessarily always materialized that way. And that's been the roller coaster ride of the season. The belief, I think, for some people in the past was, well, the Brewers kind of got by. Craig Counsell kind of carried these lesser, lower payroll rosters through. So how in the world is anyone going to come along and do that this year? To me, I think we've learned two things there. There are a lot of ways to do it. Pat Murphy, in terms of managing, Pat Murphy's been just he's had the Midas touch. He's done a masterful job in running this team. And maybe the talent was a little bit better than we thought. Matt Arnold, the general manager, I think, deserves a lot of credit there as well. And there have been pieces available to plug in where we didn't necessarily know that there were.
I think that's part of what I wonder for Craig Counsell, does it take away some of his mystique to see what Pat Murphy has been able to do with this lineup this year?
It takes away some of the mystique. I would agree with that assessment. I would say over time, we'll see how the Cubs do. My guess is they'll start to sign some players that are of the Craig Counsell mold, and that team will get better, and you'll say, boy, he is a good manager. Right now, the narrative would say, the Brewers have. Where did the Brewers finish this year in relation to the Cubs? Anybody can measure that.
Ted, as you're watching this as a fan, you go into the season, I don't know, what were your expectations? Where did you think the Brewers are going to land? Or were you one of those guys who were optimistic and thought maybe it'll be better than it looks?
Because I am a fan. Tim covers them. It's his beat. I have the luxury of being, a season ticket holder, the tickets that I pay for. So I have every right to go, this is what I thought all along. But I can't even tell you that with a straight face, right? For all the reasons you just mentioned. There's Cy Young winning award pitcher going to Baltimore, and you get a guy. Who'd you get? Well, it turns out they got a guy named Joey Ortiz, right? He's part of that trade. He's been integral in this whole thing. So you go in with the optimism and the naivete that you do every year, which is the beauty of baseball, which is why I'm a fan and a season ticket holding fan, because you get to go, this is our year. Who one of our coworkers has a plate that says this is our year. I think one of our producers does.
Is that Matt?
Yeah, I think that's Matt, right? And
yeah.
I love that optimism. This is our year. And sometimes you say it jokingly, but remember last year was supposed to be the rebuilding year, and they did pretty well getting into the playoffs. Granted, they lost in the first round, but then this year you didn't know what to expect.
That's the funny thing. The this is our year plate almost feels like, there's always next year. Hope springs eternal. It sounds like almost the mantra of a consistently losing team, which for a long time, this was.
It could be a cynical phrase as much as an optimistic one.
That's why when I talked about 6 playoff appearances in 7 years for a franchise that before that had been 4 times in its entire existence, where did this come from? And as a season ticket holder, and then you covering the team, have expectations completely changed for what the Milwaukee Brewers are supposed to do come, April 1st?
I think the departure of Craig Counsell allowed fans to step back a little bit, as Ted kind of suggested. This year, the expectations were not the same from the fan base at the beginning either. Otherwise, I would say, yes, the fan expectation has been at a certain level. Even the year they didn't make the playoffs, they came close. So you're there as a fan. You're invested in this team that's now, what are they going to do in October, right? I mean, that's what happens. Okay, they can get in. You talked about how many years they've gotten in. Well, how far have they gone? So that's what the next step is for any fan. How are they going to get there? This year, because of the change of expectations, because of the change in personnel, because of the change in manager, I think people took a collective step back. Well, I can just kind of enjoy Brewer baseball. And suddenly now they've played better. The other day, they were losing by 8 runs against Arizona. They were in danger of losing a 4th straight game for the first time all season. They heard boos at home, and Pat Murphy afterwards was even saying, wow, based on what this team has done this year. But he then spun that into, that shows you now the expectations are high for this team, and maybe some of these young players who have thought, well, this is just a fun year, are realizing they are being held to a higher standard.
And I really got to question those fans. You're booing this team. You're booing this team with more scrap and more heart than any Brewer team I have seen since, 1982 perhaps. And there have been some scrappy teams. Let's not be wrong. They've had to survive on, scrap and grit. But that you're right. We've become those kind of fans. It's similar to when the Wisconsin Badgers got very good and we're going to a New Year's Bowl game just about every year. And then the program slipped a little bit. And you're like, well, these guys stink and they used to be great. Well, no, they didn't used to be great. I can tell you I was there at a time when they were not great, when the Garden State Bowl was a big thing. So expectations are a funny thing. But booing this team, even after they were approaching their 4th loss, if you booed them, don't you dare applaud them when they came back.
I came to Milwaukee in 2004, so 20 years ago, and I remember listening to the radio. I was out on a run listening to the radio. They were talking about the Brewers had a chance to have a 500 season, and the whole conversation, well, all the call-ins was about, is that a winning campaign for a team that has been bad for so long? Is that a successful season? Of course, a 500 season now would be a grave disappointment. Look at what's happening in my childhood hometown of St. Louis, where they're over 500 and yet no one's coming to the games, and they're, they want to toss out the GM and everybody else. Expectations go a long way. When I came here 20 years ago, Ted, you were a season ticket holder then, if I recall.
Right.
And if you had known then that
I took you to games when you first moved here.
You did.
Yes.
And I had a blast at those games. And I think about the players we were seeing back then. I'm trying to think of, gosh, who
Jeremy
were the players?
Burnett's.
Tyler Houston.
Yeah.
But 20 years ago, would you have ever thought this team was going to go to the playoffs 6 out of 7 years?
No, you just wouldn't.
Well, and a 500 season was held up even by the franchise as a milestone. To be honest with you, it was, well, look, here, we're making progress. Look, we are able to now compete with the big boys, if you will. I've covered. I grew up watching this team. I've covered this team. Davey Lopes was fired, and Jerry Royster takes over as a manager. You're talking about 100-loss season. You're talking about hosting an all-star game. The things they tried to get excited about because the on-field product just was not going to be there on any sort of consistent basis.
Which is why I used to front load my season ticket. I have a 20-game package, right? Do a lot of April, May, June, because come August and September, there are going to be games you can't get people to go with you. Now, I hold a lot of games. As we record, I'm going this weekend, the final weekend, even though there's no suspense involved anymore. I don't think they're going to be able to make that second spot at this point, right?
It's unlikely.
It's unlikely. So they'll finish third in the league. So there's not a lot of suspense. But I wanted to hold that just in case it was coming down to that. So I've now, as a fan, sort of changed the way I allot my ticket.
So I want to talk about this team this year because we talked about it being sort of this unexpected season, and pitching is one thing. You go in with, you lose Corbin Burns, Brandon Woodruff. You talk about Devin Williams going to miss half the season, and you come in with a rotation, Freddie Peralta at the top, and then who else is going to be there after that? And through the course of this season, the Brewers have started 17 different starting pitchers. That is third most in all of the major leagues, and by far the most in this division. And yet, here they are walking away with the division.
And the pitching has been no fluke. I'll admit, at the beginning of the season, and I cover the Brewers, it's my responsibility to know who's in the chain and coming up. I did not know who Tobias Myers was. I had no idea. I had never heard of Jared Koenig. I mean, these are players who have become very successful, important parts of this team this season. I'm not embarrassed to say it, but this is also the same staff that took a flyer on Dallas Keuchel earlier in the season, acquiring him for $1 and seeing what he had. I mean, that is what this season was. Throw everything at the wall, see what works. Well, suddenly a lot of stuff is sticking to the wall, even on that pitching staff. And now there's a debate. Well, is it Freddie Peralta? Is it Tobias Myers who you're looking to in the playoffs? Right. That sort of thing. So there's been such an improvement. And the Brewers, not to get too inside baseball, but the Brewers have a pitching lab. They've had a lot of success with converting players who've had marginal success into better pitchers as they've gone along. Some of these guys who've come to this organization have said they've really benefited from this pitching lab. So maybe more credit is due to player development and pitcher development than we would have expected.
I was looking at my notes. Somewhere in here I had pitching lab. That's everybody's talking about this mysterious pitching lab, and is that making the difference for this team?
A few years ago, Derek Johnson was the pitching coach, and he left to take more money with the Cincinnati Reds. Oh, all is lost. All is lost, right? Derek Johnson is gone. And no slam at Derek Johnson. What have the Reds done since, and what have the Brewers done since?
They just fired their manager yesterday.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it doesn't. And that's not a shot at Derek Johnson. I'm just thinking, it's similar to Craig Counsell. Well, what can possibly happen after the departure? Well, what could happen? Things could go in a positive direction, and they have.
And can I just mention that managerial making Pat Murphy? At first, I thought it was a defensive move, right? Keep him from going and sitting on Counsell's left at Wrigley. But no, it turned out to be a really offensive move. Like the players immediately, Christian Yelich in particular, salooning it, saying, we love this guy. I had no idea how players felt about the bench coach. Maybe you had better insight into that. But I thought it was, let's keep him from going to Chicago. Instead, it turns out to be just a wonderful, wonderful change of philosophy.
And I wonder, isn't that part of it too, is if players love their manager, if they connect with their manager, you can really have a clubhouse that's tight.
If they respect the manager too. And Murphy's a guy that you can respect.
And I think Pat Murphy has a significant college baseball background where you're educating your players and you're teaching them about getting better at the game and kind of the whole team spirit type thing, more so than you do in the major leagues. A major league player, by the time he gets to the major leagues, he's largely an independent contractor. You can talk about liking your manager, but these guys all have had their own paths to get there, and they're going to have their own paths wherever they go. So you're putting them together, and sometimes it's a hodgepodge that works, and sometimes it's not. But college baseball, it's different. Pat Murphy has a lot of that background. But this being such a young team, he's given some of that college spirit to this team, that college approach. It's worked very well. So you've had the players, the veteran players that you talk about who do respect what he's doing on a regular basis and see his baseball decision making. And then you have these young players who are kind of along for, is this how it's supposed to be? Well, yes, I guess so. And then when they're encouraged, they have seemed to have had more success because of it.
You talk about the team chemistry. It just reminds me of the quote about the Red Sox team of 77 or 78, 26 guys, 26 cabs.
Yep.
I want to get to so many things, but we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some of the young players who've really stood out this season, especially with the bat in their hands. And we're going to do that when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record. We were talking about the Brewers playoff campaign here in 2024. And one of the names that obviously really stands out is someone who was signed back when he hadn't swung the bat even once in the major leagues. $82 million contract, 8-year contract for Jackson Chourio. At the time, a lot of people said, man, that's a lot of money to give a guy in the minor leagues. But he was obviously a hot prospect. And this year, it looks like that was a decision that really paid off. Yeah.
After 2 months, it was still, boy, that's a lot of money to pay a guy. And over the last several months, that's almost a bargain. As a 20-year-old player, the youngest player in Major League Baseball history to have a 20-homer, 20 stolen base season. This Brewer team at times this season has been absolutely carried by individuals. It was William Contreras early in the year, Christian Yelich at one point earlier in the year. Willie Adames has gotten so hot. But over the last couple of months, Jackson Chourio would be on that list as well. As a 20-year-old player, completely impactful. His speed impacts defense and the running game. Brewers have done very well this year with the running game. And you don't hear anyone saying that's too much money to commit to a player. You're saying this is a cornerstone for this franchise going forward.
And it's such an anti-Brewer move. You're allowed to bring up a rookie and keep him at a certain pay scale for a while, which is why very often teams will wait until later in the season or past a certain mark. And they kept saying, well, they were going to bring up late and save money, although the Cubs never said that. So the same thing, and you couldn't blame the Brewers for doing it. They have to watch every penny and nickel, right? More than a lot of teams do because they're a small market team. And plus, on the heels of Yelich's huge contract, I get the sense that front office was always a little hesitant to really commit a lot of money to one player because you
can hamstring the organization if it goes wrong, right?
And so I think they were a little gun shy. So on a couple fronts, that was a really non-Brewer move, in my opinion, but it might turn out to be a bargain.
And you mentioned so many names, obviously, William Contreras being one of them, who's been, I believe he's over the 800 mark in OPS. He has been obviously very good in the battery behind the plate. His brother Wilson not having such a good season over in St. Louis, and he's had some things to say about ownership there. But it feels like this is a team where there's been a different star every night.
I agree with you, and the guys want to play. I mean, that's one of the things you look at with this team as well. William Contreras wants to catch every game, even if he shouldn't. He wants to catch every game, and he's been able to lobby his way into the lineup on occasion. Yes, maybe as the season going along, you say that's shown some wear and tear. Willie Adames played every game at shortstop till they clinched. Every game at shortstop, that doesn't happen in the major leagues. These guys want to play. Bryce Terang has been a little up and down with his play, but he wants to be out there every day, and he's never wavered defensively. He's been an asset for you. Joey Ortiz, as you mentioned, was not the big name in the trade for Corbin Burns. It was DL Hall, who's had all sorts of injury problems this year, but Ortiz has locked down a spot in the regular lineup, and while his batting average has dipped, he's provided the defense. He's been a stabilizing player over there. So yes, a lot of different players, Brian, to say what you have suggested, and not always the expected player. I think that's one thing as well. Blake Perkins was why'd they even pick up another outfielder when they got him? Now he's a legitimate weapon defensively in particular.
When it comes to superstars, the one guy who you might classify as a superstar in this team, Christian Yelich, was having a great year. I mean, not just a good year, a resurgent year. And then once again, the back problem surfaces. When that happened, did that feel like, well, here we go again? It's another year where a promising season goes down too, but it doesn't feel that way right now.
If you asked me to answer your question directly, I'd say yes, it did. This was a fun little story, and it was going well. And now your best player is going to miss the rest of the season, and so inevitably they're going to fall off, and they have not fallen off. And Christian Yelich has come back. He's been around the team. He's been a definite positive influence around the team to this point, and rather than be crushed by the injury, he feels re-energized, like he's going to be back next year with this young core, and they're going to be able to go forward with that.
He has impressed me so much the way he has handled being out for the season. And you're right, being around in the game. I go to games, he's on the front step of the dugout. He's up there, he's talking, he almost seems relaxed in his role as a non-playing leader, which is a really nice evolution to see out of him. I did not have that feeling, though, to be honest with you. I know Tim said, here we go, again, and it's been a nice little run. I thought they are so stacked in the outfield that it just gives Blake Bergens, for example, or another player, Garrett Mitchell, gives them more playing time. And he has been nagged by injuries before, and they have overcome them in the past. So while would I want him in there with that perhaps MVP season he was having? Of course. But I did not get the sense of dread like, oh, we're going to start sinking now. I really didn't.
Well, and while his bat obviously has been outstanding this year, they probably improve a little bit defensively with him not in the outfield. Is that fair to say?
Well, Garrett Mitchell's a very good defensive outfielder. Blake Perkins is an outstanding defensive outfielder. Jackson Churio can run like anyone. So Sal Frelick is a gamer out there. So I don't think you're necessarily wrong. I think Yelich's experience, though, and knowledge on where to go with throws and what to do is hard to replace as well. I think Christian Yelich makes any team better when he's on the field, but obviously, Ted, you've been proven correct with the opportunity there for some of these other younger players. They've stepped into it and taken advantage of it. And even Churio, maybe, it dovetails a little bit where his numbers really started to pick up as after Yelich went out.
I said in the intro to this or early on in this that the team went almost perfectly wire to wire. If I understand, I think there was one date in maybe in April for one day they were half a game out or something. But basically they went wire to wire in first place. I remember it was around the All-Star break, and I think it might have been the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Somebody had tweeted out something saying, the Brewers have a 5-game lead at the break. Is the season, is the division already over? And the response they got was a resounding, overwhelming, are you kidding? It's 5 games in July. There's no way this is over. And yet...
We've been hurt before.
Right. And yet no one really... You said the Cubs made a little bit of a run, but nobody ever really closed that gap.
Pirates did for a while in the spring. A little bit.
And they actually, at the trading deadline, were the most aggressive team in the division and got worse. So, I know I've said a few times on the Sportscast, on the 10 o'clock sports, while everybody else is kind of stumbling around behind them, the Brewers just keep moving up and pulling away in the division. And all the credit to the Brewers for doing that. And this year, the division has been mediocre at best. Cubs, I think you'd have to say, can get things going again in the future. The other programs, you have to wonder where the Pirates are right now, where the Reds are right now. Again, as you talked about, Ted, they've changed their managerial situation, and your Cardinals,
St. Louis is a mess.
It's an absolute mess. While they have some young players, what they used to be able to bank on the Cardinal way has absolutely gone away, and they're not going to be the formidable foe that you used to worry about in this division.
They used to be Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Remember, the group was chasing them, and they kept saying, "Who are these guys?" That was always the Cardinals, mid-August to September, and they would just seem to catch you and overtake you, and they were so annoying. Not even a threat this year. Not even a concern.
No, and really, and some of the, they were stacked in the outfield. They had a lot of youth. They've given some players away for a song, and it really hasn't worked out. So, yeah, St. Louis is a mess. Wilson Contreras, brother of William Contreras, called out ownership and in St. Louis, whether that's a ploy to get traded or he really wants to see something happen. Yeah, as a Cardinals fan, I can say St. Louis is a mess right now. It's not. You don't have that same fear. I remember for a long time, Brewers fans would always say, yeah, we know the Cardinals are 8 games back, but we know they're coming around in August or September. And that's not really a real threat anymore. And because of that, the Brewers clinch on September 18th before anybody else, even though they're not going to be one of the top 2 seeds in the league because they're in a division that's just not that good. So here we are. The Brewers are going to head into the playoffs. I want to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about what's to come in the playoffs, who they might face, what we can expect. And one more thing, I want to talk about Bob Uecker celebrating the locker room. We'll do all of that when we come right back. Welcome back to Open Record. The Brewers headed to October once again in the playoffs. And once again, the Brewers clinch because of a Cubs loss, but of course, you never want to celebrate the loss. They play that night. You want to go out on a win. The Brewers get a walk-off win, a really exciting. It happens at home. Those things don't always align. The stars align sort of perfectly for that. And once again, to me, I think just the money moment was in the locker room with the celebration going on, Pat Murphy putting his arm around 90-year-old Bob Uecker, and the cheers, were deafening. It was another moment. You wonder how many more of these moments will we get to see Bob Uecker in that situation.
I'm reminded of what you talked about earlier when you said when you moved here in 2004, and you went for a run and you were listening on the radio. And who were you listening to? Bob Uecker.
Oh, games,
right.
yeah. No,
yeah, you're listening to Bob Uecker.
Yeah, right.
And who did you get to listen to this summer? Bob Uecker.
Yeah.
Just the unbelievable gift that this franchise has had since its practical inception.
Yeah,
Earl Harmon at the beginning, right?
Earl Harmon, Tom Collins. Yeah.
Right, but then pretty much since then, Uecker, what a gift, what a treasure that is. And to see him down and to see the respect that Murphy gave him, but he didn't even have to do that. The players just really, really dig this guy, although their parents might not have been born when he was playing for the Cardinals.
Yeah, as a Cardinals fan, obviously, there's a special connection to Bob Uecker as well. The '64 World Series, the tuba story. I mean, all that great stuff. But he's always been the funny man as well. And even in this moment, he did it again.
But you said Cardinal connection, and that's right, and certainly true. But he's a Milwaukee native.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of this as well. He played in City Conference baseball in Milwaukee. He played minor league baseball in the state of Wisconsin. He's come back to Milwaukee. Yes, there's the comedy. Yes, there's the national profile of everything he's done outside of baseball. But this is a guy who's going to the ballpark in time pregame to interview Craig Counsell for so many years, and now Pat Murphy, and then going upstairs and sitting in the radio booth and calling games at home. And, yes, he's scaled his schedule back a little bit as the years have gone along. But do you know what that takes at age 90 to get yourself to the ballpark, to follow that routine, to call live sports
have the sharpness.
live sports action as it's taking place in front of you he still has that build of enthusiasm when things are going right, and that rejection or disappointment when things aren't going right. Gift is the perfect word, Ted, and the Brewers in the clubhouse and Brewer fans everywhere should just always relish this opportunity.
Going back to the comedy moment, though, I mean, we're watching the locker room celebration and Pat Murphy introduces him and they all spray him with champagne, and everybody who was listening heard it. It was just such a Bob Uecker moment where he says, I peed my pants. and he was having a great time with it, but you can see the joy he has of being immersed in that situation. And that's why I say, how many more times will we get to see it? I'm sure he thinks, how many more times will I get to do this? It's been probably something he never expected, but to get to do this 6 years out of the last 7, as a fan, I think we all want to see him do that.
But
after a World Series win, right?
Yeah, I'd love to keep him for the next 10 years. But more than anything else, I want to hear him say, "Your Milwaukee Brewers are world champions." He was denied that in '82.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Says the Cardinal fan.
I just want to flip this over. First 5 minutes. That's how I thought
It took
long it was going to
27.
take him
It took
to
27.
bring in
You
the
brought
card.
up
The card.
82,
I know.
not
I sort of
88,
egged you on, but I knew you were going to get there eventually, so it just did. But yeah. I want it for him as much as I want it for me or anyone else. And I'm pretty selfish, and I would love Uecker to be able to call that last game 7 of the World Series.
And baseball is that sport that it's your companion all summer, right? I mean, it is there on a nightly basis. And we've described Bob Uecker at various times as kind of the soundtrack of summer. And we've talked about these players and they've changed and who's come along this year. And Bob Uecker hasn't changed. These Brewer fans haven't changed. These Brewer fans have been listening to that soundtrack of summer for 20, 30, 40 years, have heard that same voice. And fans are fans. And that's why it's so strange to see what's happened in St. Louis, because that was locked on. That would never change. You're always going to have that fan base. But it changed.
It's funny you say that, because growing up, I feel like my comparison, my analogy to Bob Uecker, growing up in St. Louis was Mike Shannon. They played in that same era. They played together on that 64
Teammates,
World Series
friends,
team. And they're both the kind of announcers. I heard someone say this about Bob Uecker, where they shine most when it's the 6th inning of a 10-2 ball game and you've got 3 innings to kill and he goes into storytelling mode. That's when Bob Uecker's at his best. Mike Shannon was that for the St. Louis Cardinals. And that is what I think of when I think of listening to baseball on the radio.
Mike Shannon I don't know if he still has, but he had a heck of a good restaurant too in St. Louis.
Yeah, downtown near the ballpark. And I haven't been there in so long, I couldn't even tell you if it's there anymore.
Closed. It is closed.
More of a Milwaukee guy than a St. Louis guy now.
And Mike passed away, and Bob Uecker was, one of the people who he actually wanted to speak to the legacy of Mike Shannon and what that friendship meant and what baseball is about. And there aren't that many peers left from that era for those players. So it matters a lot to them. And Bob Uecker is still doing it in the booth. He's the envy of a lot of his peers from that era because he's evolved and he's still calling games for a relevant baseball team.
And the Brewers are so smart because they don't dare mess with it. What do you want to do? You want to stay at home and do home games? Fine. You want to take a night off? Fine. Do what you want to do to show up to the ballpark. Remember the big fiasco the Detroit Tigers had years ago when they tried to retire Ernie Harwell early and the fans said, "Are you kidding me?" And they brought him back. They did bring him back, right? But you shouldn't have even had to come to that. Brewers are so smart to say, "Bob, that mic is yours for as long as you want it."
So let's talk about the chance that Bob Uecker is going to get to say your Milwaukee Brewers are world champions. The Brewers are heading into the playoffs. We know that you said it's likely at this point. It's pretty unlikely they're going to get the 1 or 2 seed. They're going to be the 3 seed, the 3rd best division winner in the National League. And that's significant because it means, once again, they will play in the wild card round. The question is, who will their opponent be? They're going to be at home for 3 games, and they're going to play right now. It looks like, well, I guess it's not.
If it were today,
would it be the Mets?
Diamondbacks.
Diamondbacks right now.
Right.
Could be the Mets or the Diamondbacks. Right now, it'd be the Diamondbacks.
Yeah. As a fan, and I ask you, Ted, and as someone covering the team, is that scary considering that's who knocked you out last year? I think they were 3-4 against Arizona. This year, it seems like the Diamondbacks kind of have the Brewers' number. Is that the one team you don't want to play?
Well, all these teams have the Brewers' number. Losing records against the Dodgers and the Phillies and the Padres, another wild card team, and the Diamondbacks. They have a winning record
against the Mets.
They do against the Mets right now. As we tape this, they have 3 more games to play against the Mets this weekend at American Family Field. And if the Braves were to make it in, they do have a winning record against the Braves. So does it worry me? No, because I don't believe. And what the thing that really convinces me is that they've shaken this off. Sorry, Taylor. Is that 10-8 win the other night, or 10-9? What did it turn out to be on Sunday?
Yeah, against the Diamondbacks.
Yeah, they were down 8. So they've kind of said to the Diamondbacks, "I'm not scared of you anymore. We came back 8-0. How do you like them apples?" So I think that if they had lost that game and they had lost that whole series that way, I would have been like, man, they got to get past them.
And I like what you're saying there. And I also think this year's Brewers team really hasn't outsmarted itself. I think they'll play whoever they play. Yeah. I was talking to someone today. Do you think the Brewers would try to play that final Mets series of the regular season like they want to play the Mets in the playoffs, or they don't want to? Will they put strategy involved? Maybe, but I think they're going to play who they play and set up their pitching through that 3-game series and then take on whoever's next. You get the 3 games here in Milwaukee, as you said, Brian. That's the way baseball has changed the rules over the last few years for the postseason. That's an advantage. They'll be at home, and sure, it would be nice to get a bye into that second round, but maybe it's not the worst to play right on through. We've seen teams, including the Brewers in the past, have trouble kind of restarting once they had things clinched up. I genuinely don't think it's the worst thing for this team.
Dodgers had a bye last year, and the Diamondbacks, after they beat the Brewers, went into L.A. and said, "Thank you very much. We're going to keep going."
Look at the teams that made the World Series last year.
Yeah.
They both had to play at the beginning.
I haven't studied this to know. I'm sure it's very easy. The data's out there, but it seems to me that in baseball, maybe compared to other major sports, wild card teams tend to do fairly well. The Cardinals have won the World Series as a wild card. In fact, a wild card who got into the wild card on the last day of the season, they wanted to win the World Series. It's not the kind of sport where a wild card means you have very little chance.
They're catching fire usually at the time. Their momentum is good. Their juju is good. So they're catching fire right at the right time.
And again, baseball is such a sport of routine that you're playing all along and you're playing every day. It is weird to take off 3 or 4 days. It just is. Yes, it's restful, but then you have to kind of put it back together. Any one of us would say, 162 games in 180 days, that's a grind. How could any of us live that? You know what? These guys live it, have always lived it, have lived it through their minor league careers. Bob Uecker lived it. He's still living it. That's what you do. That's your lifestyle. That's your routine. And if you stay on it, to me, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Ask the Texas Rangers. Ask the Arizona Diamondbacks. They had no business having the postseason success they had last year going into the postseason. they were the teams to watch.
I wonder, it maybe is unfair to Craig Counsell, but certainly many fans look at his lack of playoff success and say, well, that's, Craig Counsell, great regular season manager, can't do it in the playoffs. Now you go into the playoffs with Pat Murphy, and it is, for a fan base, is that the hope that let's see how he handles the playoffs differently? Is that just the kind of thing a fan says, or is there something to that?
I think there might be something to that. Last year we all talked about how things went last year and in previous seasons. If you recall, at this time last year, I think the Brewers were poised to have a very successful postseason. And suddenly Brandon Woodruff out of nowhere had an injury, and it just threw them, right? Mm-hmm. Corbin Burns didn't pitch as effectively as you thought he would, and then all of a sudden, boom, they were out. It just happens like that. So if you go in with this vibe and things are going in the right direction, and Pat Murphy has had this golden touch, if you will, with this team, I think they'll ride that. I think that fans are ready to say, let's see what that turns out to be in October.
What do you think of that, Ted?
Well, I think you can overthink things too. And, you go back to 2018, right? And this prompted a rule change, I believe, in baseball, when Counsell would have one guy come in for the opening batter, right? And then what
the opener?
The opener, the term he used, the starter, like the opening pitcher, whatever. They'll plan all along. I don't see Murphy doing that. I think Murphy's saying, here's the ball, go have a little fun with it, and maybe it's not that simple. But I do think he just tells these guys to play and run, and it's fun to watch. And let's bunt with 2 strikes. It's unorthodox. You're not supposed to do it. Well, let's do it every once in a while, things like that.
All right, last thing before we go off the record, your playoff predictions. Tim.
I think the Brewers surprise. I think they get past the first round into the second round. And if that's a valid prediction, I'll go that far with it.
Ted?
I have the luxury of saying World Series or bust, baby.
This is our year. Where's your plate?
I have paid for my World Series tickets. I got them. I'm now deciding who gets to go, so why not? Why not? I get the luxury of just throwing all the logic in the air and saying, forget about that. Why not us?
October bound, the Milwaukee Brewers are headed to the playoffs, and we are bound for Off the Record when we come right back. And it is time for us to go off the record. This is the part of the podcast where we get a little more casual and have a little fun by answering a question that executive producer Sarah Smith has prepared for us. And
in other words, Tim, where they ambush us.
Yes,
right,
I have a seal. I don't know this one either, so I'm being ambushed just as well. But this, here we go, sealed envelope.
Funkenwagner porch.
Collectively, we've been to hundreds of baseball games, and that's a lot of hearing players' walk-up songs. I knew that. I had to know she would have
Sarah thing.
If you were in the MLB and needed to pick a walk-up song for your at-bat, what would it be?
This is a discussion every time you go to the ball yard with somebody. And I can't tell you why, only that it's just such a good, catchy beginning. It would either be the beginning guitar riff of Tom Petty's American Girl, or Pyro by Kings of Leon.
If you had to choose one.
I think I'll go with Pyro by Kings of Leon.
You have to hit the begin. It has to be strong at the beginning of the song. They've tightened up the gap now into how long you can play those songs. The old
because of the clock. Yeah,
absolutely. Trevor Hoffman, played
Enter Sandman.
The Hell's Bells. You're not going to get that anymore. So, I'm going to go for something recognizable. I remember Frank used to always have the outfield. Josie's on a vacation. Pick crowds into it right away. So I would go cliched. I'm not afraid to admit it. I'd go center field, or I'd go Vanilla Ice, Ice Ice Baby.
I have a hard time with this because I don't know if there's any song that I feel like sort of like represents me. So I think I'm more like you said. Like I want something that's going to have a hook people know, that's going to get people going. And this is going to sound maybe there's got to be somebody who's already done this. I would go with something hard rock, something that would get people fired up. It would be like Metallica, Ride the Lightning, something. Hard driving.
I always wanted to ask Craig Counsell why All Along the Watchtower by Jimi Hendrix was his walk-up song. I always found that interesting. Didn't strike me as a Hendrix guy, but I could be wrong.
Corey Hart was country boy, and people were like, that's Corey Hart. Sometimes it perfectly fits.
Dave, come on, you're back there. What would your walk-up song be?
In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, probably.
I think it'd be 21st Century Schizoid Man from King Crimson.
Everybody knows it.
Actually, they do.
Catchy.
Yeah. Kanye West sampled the entire chorus for his thing. Didn't pay for it. But so that's probably where at least younger people would know it is from Kanye.
A King Crimson reference. How
But
about that?
but even aside from that, you probably know it. You just don't necessarily know that you know it. You've heard, and again, it starts off real recognizable, hard off the beginning.
Okay.
That's what you need.
Maybe I go with
start.
Rat Out of the Cellar, but it feels like everyone would just know that from the Geico commercials now, right?
Oh,
the younger generation. Anyway.
What about all the karaoke stuff you've done over the years? What?
Well, see, so for me,
I know you can't really sing as you're walking up to the plate, but
that's true, but it would take a long time before my at bat if we played Bohemian Rhapsody. So
I need a minute. Need a minute.
just wait till after the Galileo. Anyway, we got another question here in case we had more time, and we do have more time. Need more baseball fodder. It says baseball etiquette. If you need to get out of your seat and walk out of the row you're in,
I got this. Go ahead. Finish
do
the
you
question.
wait until the batter is done, until the inning is over?
Yes.
Is it rude to make people stand up during the inning so you can get out?
Yes, yes, and yes. Absolutely. It drives me crazy. This is why I love hockey. They have people who wait until there's a stop in the play. Then they say you can go to your seats. That's the way it should be done. I don't know why people who have such good seats cannot read the situation. 3-2, bottom of the seventh, bases loaded. I'm coming back to my seat. A, where you been? B, come on. I think the ushers, if I could give feedback to the Brewers, the ushers got to do a better job of saying, wait till there's a break in the play.
Tim, do you actually get to sit in the seats?
I go once in a while as a fan. Yeah, absolutely. To me, you have to make your move at the end of an inning. You can't do it at the end of an at bat. It has to be the end of an inning. And if you go to Wrigley or you go to Fenway or something where it's not all about the concourse and the game day experience, it's it was built to watch baseball. You can't climb out of those seats in the course of an actual inning. So that's the way it originally was to me. That's the way baseball should be enjoyed.
I agree with you on the hockey part where they actually, the ushers will stop you from coming back in from getting food or the bathroom. But this is a little bit of a different question is when you get up to go out. And it seems at that point you should be aware of what the situation is in the game.
You're still blocking people and you're still...
No,
yeah,
right. And that's my point. You have even more reason to
right.
know what's going on
True.
unless you're just not paying attention. And we know there are some people who go to games and they're not paying any attention.
Yeah.
But if you don't know, maybe kind of look, like you say, read it's easy to know when the inning ends.
Yeah.
They play music, the organist is going.
Pitcher walks off the mound towards the
Pitcher walks off the
There's
mound.
not-
The umpire says,
there's
"Let me
some-
check. What do you got on there?"
Subtle,
Okay.
there are subtle signs that there's a break in the play.
Okay, we have a little more time, so I have one of my own that I want to ask because this is one that I've grown up going to baseball games since I was a little boy, and my parents handled this a certain way, and I'm curious how you are about this. If you are at a baseball game and the decision is known, it's 10-0 in the eighth inning. Do you leave early to beat traffic? Do you stay to the last pitch?
I've always been a stay to the last pitch person. From my job, you're always going to stay there anyway. But even as a fan, I stay there till the end. I used to stay and watch, the roof open and close to the Space Odyssey.
That was the big thing.
Oh, my gosh.
Close it, open it again. I used to be a stay to the last pitch. I'm older now. I like to beat traffic. So I used to say, and no disrespect to Josh Hader, if the Brewers had the lead, okay, we're leaving. Because if Hader blows it, I don't want to see it. And otherwise, I think he's got it. I don't need to stick around. Hader's got this. And if they're going to blow it, I don't want to see it anyway. That's my philosophy.
That actually goes deeper into the psychology of sports because I will tell you there have been times where I'm going to miss a game because I'm busy doing something and I have to tell myself, I really want to see this game. But if they lose, I wouldn't have wanted to watch. And if they win, I'll feel okay that they won. I can go back and see highlights. But by that logic, I would never have to watch another game. Yeah. And we love watching the games because we love watching the games.
But you say watch highlights, and to me, that's where baseball differs from other sports. I know we're near the end of our conversation, and we can't get way astride. But to me, that's why you don't leave in the course of the action, because it's a build, it's a denouement, it's an up or a down. It's not a basketball highlight. There's a dunk, and I want to see that clip. There's a context to everything about baseball.
But there's a reason I don't go to scary movies either. I don't want to see it. And if Hader was going to let one go, I don't want to see it. So. Do we have time for my off-the-record question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Your food and drink choice as a fan. I know you can't do anything when you're there. It's working.
Broaden the beer.
That simple?
I mean, a beer, although I do like now that they have the craft beer options, which doesn't feel like traditional baseball, but I still like that. Food-wise, I love good loaded nachos.
Polish. They make the best Polish sausage, and they make a mean brandy old-fashioned. out there at no, I was going to say Miller Park American Family Field.
I mean, I have to say that obviously the options of what you have changed
Greatly
over the years,
improved, yes.
and definitely makes the experience that much more enjoyable. I have to answer though. My answer was I never would leave a game early. My parents, when I was a kid, even if it was a school night and it was a rain delay, we stayed once for a Cardinals doubleheader that ended with a Steve Lake home run at 3:14 in the morning. Wow. And we stayed. Now, of course, I skipped school the next day, and they were okay with that. But hey, mom and dad said so. We never left a game early. We're there to see it out and cheer the boys on. I guess we got to wrap things up. We're going to take a break, and we come right back. All right, we've run a little long this time, so I'm going to wrap things up and say thanks, guys, and go Brewers. With that, I'm Bryan Polcyn, and we'll be back again next week.